So we're going to do this in kind of two phases. So I want to read, we're going to pick up in verse 14 where we left off, and we'll do 14 through 46 of Matthew 26. And then we're going to just read a longer reading this morning of the entire betrayal through the crucifixion. I think it's helpful. We don't get a chance to do that often. And so I think it might be beneficial to just take that in one shot and read through that together, and hopefully you all agree. But as we've been talking and building up in class to this moment, right, this like final week of Jesus, we talk about coming in, going to the temple, all those sorts of things all the way through, and the way that he is pointed towards the Pharisees and towards the problems that are there, everything like that, all the way till this kind of last great sermon that he's given, where he talks about the final judgment on Jerusalem and all those things. He gives this final kind of lesson to the apostles that we've gone through. And so now it's coming up to the Passover. And it says in verse 14, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he reclined at table with the 12, and as they were eating, he said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, is it I, Lord? And he answered, he who is dipped with his hand in the dish with me will betray me. And the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. And Judas, who would betray him, said, is it I, Rabbi? And he said to him, you have said so. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, take, eat, this is my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. And Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. And Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. We've read these verses a lot, I think. But as we go through them this morning, anything stand out to anybody? Any phrases, ideas, anything catch your attention in particular? Anything stand out as we read through these verses this morning? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so I didn't have anything in my notes about that question. And yet when I read it, that was the very thing that stuck out to me as well. What are you going to give me? Like he goes to them and he says, okay, what are you going to give me? And like you said, it's a fascinating, and because it struck me, right? Like it's clear that he's willing to betray Jesus for a price. And, they talk about 30 pieces of silver is the cost of a slave or whatever. People talk about how much money that is. But, is it really that much, considering that he understands the gravity of it and that he's asking for it? And it's interesting. I mean, maybe there's a negotiation there that's not written, but it reads as if, what are you going to give me? And they say, we'll give you this much. And he said, okay, that's enough. It's not like he walked away. It's not like he goes into the negotiation thinking, I've got to get at least this much. Which I think all that matters because it says a lot about his character, doesn't he? That there's not like he's demanding a certain amount to do this thing. He'll just take it. Like, what am I going to get? It speaks to his heart and his greed and all those sorts of things. And of course, the question itself is one that maybe we ask not so directly in our lives, but we constantly are asking, right? Like what will I get to betray these things that I believe in, right? Like how much do I have to be given to compromise on this moral standard that I have, right? Like whatever it is. Could be done in business, could be done in your personal life, whatever it is. Like I'm only going to compromise my financial security and take out this loan if I can get like this percentage, right? Like there's like a interest rate that makes it tempting. There's like a number that we have for some of those things. But when it comes to our like morality, like is there a number that like causes you to like rethink your standard? You like believe in your job and what you do, but you're not well compensated. And somebody comes along and says, we'll pay you double to come work for us. And you're like, well, I don't respect that company, but is that my problem, right? Like if it's 20% more, I say no. If it's 50% more, I say yes. And it's not that decision about going to work for the other company is immoral. It's just the question of what will you give me in our lives that I think is worth considering. Like, what will you give me is a fascinating question, isn't it? Yeah, Ian. Yeah. This is what's striking to me, because this all happens, and then they're at the Passover, and Jesus says, one of you will betray me. And they're all like, is it me? It's not going to be me. Like, I would never do that. Wait, is it me? Like, which one? Who's going to do it? And they all start looking around, they're looking at themselves, and Jesus is like the one who put his hand in the dish with me. Now, I've heard lots of things about this. People trying to break down the way that they would have these meals where they'd recline around the table. And so you'd have two people that would be facing each other and somebody across. And so it's probably that Judas reached in and John's the one that's there next to him based on some ways that you read John. So you can like figure out like the way the table is laid out. And so it's like he probably said that just to John and not to everybody else. And so John's the only one that knew that it was Judas. And then this question from Judas would have been like on this side. And so he would have heard that. But I don't know. That's all beyond me. I mean, we can take other people's scholars' word for that. I'm not reconstructing the Last Supper table. I mean, I don't know that that's the point. I think that the idea here is that you have Jesus and you have these disciples and they're all questioning, but I don't know that they know what the betrayal means, right? Like like when he says one of you is going to betray me, what does that mean? Because if someone's going to betray you, what are the ways that they can betray you? They can violate your trust, right? Is it a betrayal if you tell somebody a secret and they go tell somebody else? Yeah. Is it a betrayal what Peter does, where he says, denies Jesus 3 times? Yeah, that's a betrayal of a trust and a confidence, right? So I don't know that they would have had to understand that the betrayal of Judas is he literally sold Jesus to the people that want to kill him. And, of course, people are like, well, Judas may not have known they wanted to kill him, and there's, all that's a little bit irrelevant. The fact is he went and paid money to betray Jesus. Jesus is pointing out that somebody's going to betray him, and they're all wondering who it is. And here's the takeaway. Jesus knows that Judas betrayed him. I think that's the point. Jesus is still eating at the table with Judas. I think that's the point. Jesus still goes to the garden to pray, even though he knows that's where Judas is going to betray him. Like, I think that the point of all this text is that Jesus knows what's happening. He's not unaware. He's not caught off guard, right? We did a sermon a couple weeks ago on Abner, right? And he gets betrayed. And it's like he died as a fool dies, He didn't see it coming. That's not Jesus. Jesus didn't die as a fool dies. Jesus died knowing exactly what was going to happen. And that's why this is emphasized in the text, I think, as much as anything else. That Jesus is in control even of his betrayal. He knows it's happening, and he's complicit to it. That this is the plan. And I think that's important to understand because it speaks to the purpose of Jesus, what he accomplished, and all those things. It's the same going back to Matthew 24 and the judgment on Jerusalem, right? When you see these things happen and Jerusalem is destroyed, don't think that God's promises weren't fulfilled. That's part of the plan. And I'm telling you it's going to happen because this is all part of the plan that God's laid out. And so the prophecy is a way of not just showing that God's divine, it's also a way of reassuring the people that are present of God is in control. And he knew that this was going to happen. And it gives us the benefit in hindsight of knowing that God was in control and knew it was going to happen and was complicit. All that matters, I think. Is there a hand?
All these things, he had the absolute pinnacle of everything. He saw all of it. And yet, none of it mattered because he didn't change his heart. So we can be in the best church, we can be the best friends, we can have the best preacher, we can have awesome elders, we can have everything we want to build up ourselves, but if we don't change his heart, then you're not doing it. It doesn't matter.
That's exactly right. I mean, it is so easy, even as we've gone through Matthew, right, to pick on the apostles, for things that they've done. Oh, they don't get it, right? It's easy to pick on people for their mistakes, whatever, here and there. What's hard when you read the Bible, the really difficult thing, is to see the mirror that it is. To see the way that it convicts us. I mean, here's Judas, as Michael said, walking around with Jesus. With Jesus, he heard the parables firsthand. He saw the miracles. He saw people who were lying in a bed their whole lives get up and dance around with joy. He saw people who were born blind all of a sudden see. He saw lepers have their skin miraculously healed instantly. He saw dead people come back to life. But it didn't convict him. That's the amazing thing, right? Because we want to say, if I only, or I need this sign, or I need this thing, maybe there's a sign that convicts you. Maybe there is an evidence that you will receive in your life, some sort of providence from God that touches you, that reassures you of your faith. But I think that there's an element to, you have to believe without that. The Bible is convicting enough. And if you're not convicted by the story of Jesus and who he is, there needs to be some heart change here. There needs to be some self-awareness. There needs to be some sort of change that occurs. because it is convicting to see Jesus live this way, to willingly go to the cross as we're about to read. As we said, he knows that this is the plan from the beginning. He's been talking about it for chapters, foretelling it, and he marches towards Jerusalem to face it. Like, this isn't happenstance. There's a convicting element to this that Judas didn't get. And then we get the Lord's Supper, and then, this whole section, we could spend so much time on it, and I apologize for mismanaging our time, but at the same time, you rush through a previous chapter, there's good stuff there too. So, you just lose, I guess. But the Lord's Supper, there's a couple things here I want to highlight. One is, we get nervous because of the Catholic view of transubstantiation, which is namely that when they take of the sacraments, that they literally, physically become Jesus' body and blood. And we don't believe in that. I think the Bible doesn't necessarily teach that. But because of that, we lose sight, I think, sometimes of the words that Jesus actually used. He doesn't say that this is a representation of my body. He says, this is my body. He doesn't say, this is an emblem of my blood. He says, this is my blood. And there's something that should be striking to us about that language that we don't need to lose sight of. It doesn't mean that we're Catholic and believe in, but it does mean that we are convicted by the starkness of the language, that he is the sacrifice that we are partaking of, that we are ingesting him and who he is. And there's something that's really kind of visceral and powerful about that. Like, we say you are what you eat, right? Like, we kind of make that joke. And our bodies sometimes show that we are what we eat, right? Like, you can kind of tell the sorts of dietary habits that we may or may not have. Like, we wear those things. But much more specifically, there's something powerful about this sacrifice of Jesus and the fact that we participate in it and consume it. That we are taking on this character in this covenant. And I think it's striking that he says that this is the blood of the covenant. It's not the blood of the old covenant, right? Well, of blood of bulls and goats and sheep. This is the blood of this covenant that he is establishing. That is different, that is transformative, that is powerful. And if we had time, we could go to Hebrews 10 and talk about some of that, or go through like all those chapters there really leading up to Hebrews 10, talking about the sacrifices that were made and all those things. But we need to be touched, I think, by the power of the language here and what it means to embody this sacrifice, to participate in it the way that Jesus says. James, did you have your hand up?
So precious and perfect, all who come into contact with it have freedom from their sins. That's the power behind that sacrifice, and we're reminded of that every first day of the week.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. As we continue on, then there's this conversation. They go to the Mount of Olives, and then there's this, you all will fall away. Peter says, I will never fall away. He says, actually, you will. In fact, you're going to deny me 3 times. He's like, no, never. And then they go to pray. And then what happens to Peter immediately after this? Jesus asks him to do what? Watch and pray. And Peter does what? Falls asleep. And so there's like this kind of bitter irony to this, right? Is this a betrayal? No. I don't know that we would use that strong of language for what Peter does. At the same time, though, it's like, I will stand with you to the bitter end. I will die before. And then Jesus is like, please pray with me. Now, to be fair to Peter, obviously, because I'm not trying to be hard on him, he doesn't understand what's going on. Maybe he should, maybe we could argue that, but he doesn't. He doesn't understand what's at stake the way that Jesus does. He's not, sweating his drops of blood as he prays, because he doesn't know what Jesus is about to go through. Jesus told him, but I don't know that any of us would have actually understood what it is that's at stake and what's happening. And so there's this back and forth there. Now, I've heard people make the comment before, and I think rightfully so, look at the difference in the trajectory of the next 24 hours or however many hours of Peter versus Jesus. Jesus prays thoughtfully and emotionally. And from this moment on, he is calm and he is in control, even as he faces judgment. Peter is lost and scared and denies. One prayed, one didn't. One prayed, one slept. And so the point, I don't think, is to be hard on Peter. It's to talk about kind of the power and the emphasis here of the prayer, to be watch and pray. Like, be aware of what's going on. Now is the time to be praying, Peter. And he didn't understand it. He didn't do it. And so then there's a consequence of that. The other thing here that I want to highlight is the prayer that Jesus offers. He says, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And then he prayed a second time, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And I think this is interesting. Why does Jesus throw "your will be done" at the end of these two prayers? Why does he include it? Well, the first part of the prayer is hoping for a plan B. The second part of the prayer is, I know there's not. Right. And I think that that's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's well said. We're going to come back to the separated from God thing because I have thoughts on that. But we'll get to that here in chapter 27. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and we're going to read. This is going to be a longer reading. We'll go ahead and read from the betrayal all the way through the crucifixion. And we'll stop in verse 56 of chapter 27. So we won't read his burial and those things. We'll just read all the way through to his death. So we'll have a longer reading here, and then we'll hone in on a few things. But let's go ahead and just try and take all this in one chunk. Matthew 26:47. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." They came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scripture be fulfilled that it must be so?" And at that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples left him and fled. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. Now, the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, 2 came forward and said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, you have said so. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you? Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you mean. And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath, I do not know the man. And after a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver and the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, you have said so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? And they all said, let him be crucified. And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And all the people answered, his blood be on us and on our children. Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. The soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit on him, and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which which means place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tomb after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly this was the Son of God." There were also many women there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Joseph and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So one of the things I want to highlight as we go through this, and you all may have heard this before, but there's been a lot of stuff that's done that shows the parallels between Matthew 27 and Psalm 22. There's a lot of similarities. And so we talked about from the beginning of the class the way that Matthew has this kind of emphasis on fulfilling Old Testament prophecy. And the point of that is to show that Jesus did what we couldn't do, right? He fulfilled the things that the Israelites couldn't fulfill. He withstood the things that we couldn't resist, that they couldn't resist in the wilderness, all that kind of stuff. But what's striking here is this Psalm 22, Matthew 27 comparison. And there's things like Psalm 22, 7 and 8, he trusted in the Lord, had him deliver him. Psalm 22, 1, of course, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22, 6, I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind as they scorn him and strip him of his clothes. They divide my garments among them as they do that. My bones are out of joint, my strength is dried up. In Psalm 22, the physical breaking of Jesus, we see the similarity. I mean, on and on, a lot of these things. So Jesus did all these things that we couldn't do. And yet here at the end, it's kind of flipped, isn't it? He submits himself to the very thing that humans experience, except obviously magnified, but like suffering and pain and torture. And so it isn't just that Jesus did all the things that we couldn't do, that he fulfilled the law, that he did all these things righteously. In the end, he also submitted himself to death, to the human experience, to the consequence of sin. And there's something that's kind of incredible about that, isn't there? That this last prophecy that's fulfilled is that he goes in and suffers and endures the very things that David's writing about in Psalm 22, the very sorts of things that humans have suffered since sin entered the world. And so the contrast of those two things is pretty powerful. That these two things happen at the same time, that he fulfills what we couldn't and yet also submits himself to the very things that we're submitted to. I want to go back to this idea of Jesus being alone, separated from God. Because I've thought about this a lot, and that's a comment we say a lot, that Jesus was alone, separated from God on the cross. I do think that Jesus was alone in his suffering, that he endured that alone, singularly. But I don't think that that means that he was abandoned by God or the Father, that he was separated from him. I think the experience of the abandonment is real, but I think the reality of a divine abandonment is not. He is God. He can't be separated from God. And so the Trinity can't be fractured, so to speak. And so you think about it this way, he was alone and that the disciples fled and that Peter denied him and that the crowds are mocking him, that the religious leaders have condemned him, that the Roman power executes him. And on the cross, he is isolated and elevated alone. Even amongst the three that are crucified, the direction is all pointed to him. And so he is alone in his shame and his silence. And I think that's a real loneliness. I think that that's not staged or symbolic. But when he cries, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't think he's pretending. I don't think that he is acting a part. I don't think that he's just trying to fulfill Scripture for the sake of fulfilling Scripture. I think he's voicing true human anguish. But I also think, would we say that David was actually abandoned by God when he says that in Psalm 22:1? That he is alone, that God forsook him when he says that? I don't think so. I think that the loneliness and the pain and the suffering that we feel does not mean that God is not with us. I don't think the Trinity is broken. I don't think that God had to separate himself from Jesus. I think they are. I think he's cut off. In fact, 2 Corinthians 5:19 says, God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. John 8:29, Jesus says, the Father has not left me alone. And talks about that early in his ministry. And Jesus himself says after this, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I don't think that the idea is that he is rejected or separated. I think that he is alone and abandoned in the sense that he is enduring this individually. Yeah.
But what he is feeling is the effects of sin. And it's not that he said, he takes on sin. 2 Corinthians 5:1.
Right.
You knew no sin. God put that on him. So that
Right.
he could be righteous.
Right.
So Jesus is experiencing something that he's never known. He doesn't understand. And the abandonment feeling, that's what sin does to us. Because when you're sick, you feel special. You feel like you're not whole until you become reconciled back. And that's one of the beautiful parts about salvation. Is you find your soul tormented and you're downtrodden. You are miserable until you're reconciled back to God. That's what Christ is feeling. Is why have you forsaken me? Well, God can't be with you. And it's not that he's not with you, he's there. He wants you, he's waiting for you. But what you're really feeling and going through is the effects of it. That's what sin does.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing because we talk about God being separated from Jesus because Jesus bore sin and God can't be in the presence of sin and all those things, which is a complicated idea because it's true, right? Holiness, set apart. We need to be set apart and redeemed to be back in the presence of God. And yet, despite the defiling of the temple, it isn't until Ezekiel, 11, that God's presence leaves the temple. Like God is still in the temple amongst the idols and the idolatry through all the kings. And it isn't until the last moment that he leaves. Satan comes into the presence of God at the beginning of Job, right? So there's this interesting thing there that we don't quite understand about God and the tolerance of sin and holiness and all those things. I don't understand exactly what all that means. I do know, though, that what we see in the crucifixion and what we see in Jesus going through this is him submitting himself to the consequence of sin, to death, to crucifixion, to suffering. And in so doing, he experiences the last thing that we experience as humans as the consequence of sin. He's obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. He submits himself to death, and now he truly becomes the advocate that we need. He becomes the intercessor that we need because he is in heaven with God, and yet he knows what it means to be hungry. He knows what it means to be poor. He knows what it means to be beaten and mocked and ridiculed, and he knows what it means to face death. All of the things that are a part of the human experience he has endured, which allows him now to be the perfect intercessor and advocate for us. That's the point that we should take away from all this. I don't think that the point of Matthew 27 is to try and parse out the way the Trinity works. The point is that it shows us how Jesus redeemed us by submitting himself to the very thing that humans suffer in death. And by doing so is able to redeem us. Yeah, James.
Just to state it from a bit of a different angle, there are those, unfortunately, who want to deny the deity of Christ. But while on earth, he was God and man at the same time. And that's a struggling point for a lot of people, but the scripture's clear. He was both. And when we look at what's going on here, we clearly see the humanity of Jesus as it were bubbling to the surface. We see somebody who knows what's coming and knows to mostly understand this is not going to be pleasant. And he's ready. He doesn't want to go through it. And he prays to his Father. And he says these things, sweats, tears as in blood, and all these things. We see that human side coming out. And this is why he's, like you just said, he's the perfect advocate for us because he's been there, done that. And that's why Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, there's no temptation that's common to man that we can't defeat through faith because even Jesus went through that ultimate end. He's experienced it, he's done it. Then that should give us strength and confidence that we can go through whatever our trials are in life. This is so key to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Him being able to make these claims of who he is and say all these things about himself. This is why, because he went through that fire for us.
You combine that back with what Michael was saying too. And I don't know if you all have ever felt this way or how frequent people feel this way, but the feeling of being separated from God, of God having abandoned you, or why aren't you here? Why aren't you interceding here? Why aren't you fixing this problem? Why aren't you healing me of this thing? Why didn't you intercede and prevent this bad thing from happening? Like those questions where you feel like God is not there, right? Like the heart-wrenching emotional pull where you don't understand how this could happen, and that must mean that God wasn't there, is the very thing that Jesus is reflecting on the cross. But it doesn't mean that God wasn't there. It doesn't mean that God isn't there. That's the amazing kind of thing. And especially for us now, knowing that Jesus is in heaven and seated at the right hand of glory, right? And is there interceding on our behalf and is our advocate and all those things. How much more so then should we understand and appreciate that God does not abandon his people, that he doesn't separate himself from us or hold us at arm's reach. Even if we may feel like that's the case, we should know better. And I think that that's part of this learning thing here. In fact, the Hebrew writer talks about that. He learned obedience to the things that he suffered. Learned, which is a fascinating concept that Jesus can learn. That divinity is learning something. And yet that's kind of at the heart of all this, right? Like this last piece that is being learned, which then empowers him to truly redeem us from these very sorts of problems and these sorts of things. It's an unbelievable sort of concept and idea as we read through this account to see that, to see Jesus kind of in this way. Any other thoughts, comments? I know we had to take a lot at once. And to be honest, part of that's because I don't want to sit there trying to articulate details of what crucifixion and scourging are like. I don't enjoy talking about that. So I kind of finagled my way out of that maybe, but yeah.
We may use a term in the political realm, a watershed moment. Something happens, we see culture, politics change, whatever. We see something as being changing. I think this is one of two really watershed moments in the Bible: the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, and then in Acts 2, the establishment of the New Testament church. So, not to minimize anything else in the Bible, but this is
Yeah.
Everything that all those prophets and inspired people talked about for thousands of years, now the moment's come.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, this is the moment, the turning point in human history. And you see its effects today. Like culturally, the perception that people have, like you see its impact across the world from that moment on. It cannot be denied, the impact that this has had, more so than any other event on the way that it affects the world. And you're right, and the key to that is, in the resurrection, there is a redemption and a promise and a solution to the problem that has plagued the world all the way since Genesis 3. There's been no solution to death until what we get to next week. So, but, I mean, we know what happens. But anyway, appreciate you all's good attention this morning. We'll finish 27 and cover 28 next week.